I was always the one who doesn't talk. On the bus, the quiet one. At the office, not very sociable. At the store, odd. In the building, a bit off. The neighbors would say, "What can you expect? She's been alone since childhood." Just sits there in silence. No hello, no goodbye. But they were wrong. I wasn't silent. I spoke, just not when they were ready to listen. I spoke in my sleep. It didn't start yesterday. I didn't suddenly wake up one day with the gift of prophecy. I've always been this way. Since I was 8, when my foster mother told the therapist, "She's normal, she just doesn't talk." But at night, she stood in the bathroom and spoke for 5 minutes, staring at the mirror, not in Russian, not in any language at all. At first, they thought it was a disorder, then trauma, then they just gave up. I grew up, became invisible, worked as an archivist, storing other people's memories in boxes, read on the subway, listen to the rain, bothered no one, lived in a ground floor apartment with peeling paint and strange dreams that no one was ever supposed to hear, except one person. His name was Vlad. He lived upstairs, a writer with no books, a courier with a dream of writing a novel. We barely spoke. Sometimes he nodded in the hallway, sometimes held his gaze as if he wanted to talk. But like everyone else, he never did, until that night. I was asleep. He couldn't sleep. The kitchen light had burned out. He sat with his laptop, drinking coffee, listening to the silence. And suddenly, a sound from beneath the floor. A voice, female, quiet, warm, but strange. He thought, TV, radio, but it was 2 in the morning. He pressed his ear to the floor and froze. The voice was mine, and it spoke words no one could understand, but they begged to be heard. They sounded like truth, like something you once knew but forgot. The next day, he stopped me by the entrance. "Hi, sorry for the weird question." I looked at him silently. He went on, "Do you know you talk in your sleep?" I nodded. "Yes, all my life." He looked serious. "I recorded it. Just 1 minute, want to hear it?" I didn't answer, just held out my hand. He played it, and I heard myself, but it felt like the past, or the future. The voice was mine, but filled with something bigger, not I, but we. The next day, he uploaded the recording online. No name, no face, no context. Just, "She speaks in her sleep." Does anyone recognize this language? And within 3 days, everything changed. The recording lasted exactly 64 seconds. It was my voice, quiet, uncertain, and yet as if it came from somewhere else. Not from this floor, not from this country, not from this reality. It sounded like rustling leaves, like water running down glass, like something ancient and alive at the same time. In the first few hours, silence. In the first day, 100 views. By the second, 100,000. And then an explosion. The first comment appeared. "I don't know who you are, but you repeated a phrase my grandmother used to say to me when I was sick. She died 15 years ago. No one else ever knew it." Then the second, "I don't understand the language, but I'm crying. I'm trembling inside. It feels like someone finally hugged my soul." And then the third, "She's speaking about me, my fear, my dream, my loss. But I don't know how that's possible. I've never told anyone." On the third day, people started translating the recording. They began trying to decode my dream. Linguists debated Aramaic, Inuit, a lost Slavic dialect. No one could say for sure. But the strangest part wasn't that. It was that everyone heard something different. And yet, all equally clearly. One person heard comfort, another, a warning, a third, a phrase that had haunted his dreams for years. On the fourth day, Vlad brought me printouts. I printed some of the comments. "Do you want to read them?" I nodded, sat on the windowsill wrapped in a blanket and read. And the further I went, the more the trembling inside grew. "You said my sister's name, the one who died, and the thing she never got to say. I've searched my whole life for what truth is. I think you spoke it. Not in words, in rhythm. I don't understand, but I understand." Vlad looked at me for a long time. "Do you realize what's happening?" I just shrugged. "I'm just speaking. like always. Only now, someone is listening. He sat beside me. You know, in this world, those who aren't heard are the ones who shout. But you just slept, and you were heard louder than anyone. On the fifth day, journalists began writing to me, requesting interviews, videos, podcasts, reports, a unique phenomenon, the mystery of the human brain, a voice from the edge of reality. But I didn't respond because I didn't need to speak. I needed to simply be. And at night, I fell asleep again. And again, I began to speak. Vlad recorded it. This time, it was longer, 3 minutes. When he listened to it, he came to me. His eyes looked worried. You said a phrase. It wasn't in a language, but I understood. What was it? He took out a notebook, wrote it from memory. You know who you are, even if everyone else forgets. I read it, and I knew, yes, it was true. By morning, the new video had 500,000 views. In the comments, Arabic, Chinese, German, Hebrew, Farsi, all saying the same thing. This is about me. She speaks my soul. I'm not alone. Vlad said it felt like a virus, but I knew this wasn't a virus. It was an echo of everything people had been holding inside for years, and now it had found its way out, through me, through sleep, through what I never hid, simply because I didn't know it could be shared. Now, it shared itself. At first, they were just words, then feelings, then coincidences. And now something had begun that no one could explain, not even those who tried hardest to not overreact. Strange stories started appearing in the comments. I listened to your voice, and for the first time in 5 years, I fell asleep without pills. My mother was diagnosed with amnesia. She couldn't remember my grandmother's name. She heard your recording and suddenly whispered it herself. I survived a car accident. I couldn't speak, couldn't feel my fingers. That night I played your voice, and in the morning I could move my hand. Vlad read them out loud, at first, slowly. Then, eventually, he just fell silent. I don't understand what's happening, he said. It's like, it's not you. I looked out the window, at the shadow of a tree trembling on the wall, and quietly answered, it is me. Just the part no one ever listened to, not even me. Letters started arriving, real ones, paper, stamped, in handwriting. People wrote by hand, not trusting screens. You don't know me, I live in Bulgaria. My daughter stopped speaking after a traumatic shock. We played your recording, and she asked, who is that? It was her first word in 8 months. My father is a retired soldier, never cried, but with your voice, he wept so hard his whole chest shook. Then he said, it felt like someone saying goodbye, someone I could never forgive. I read them, and I didn't feel pride. I felt responsibility for something I don't understand, but that now lives inside me. Vlad began creating an archive. He built a website, simple, clean. On the homepage, one sentence. She speaks in her sleep. But you hear it awake. Tell us, what did you hear? And people responded, hundreds, then thousands. And no one just wrote thank you. They wrote what changed, what opened inside them, what they remembered. One man sent an audio file, his mother lying in a coma, and after hearing my recording, her breathing rhythm changed for the first time. I didn't speak in public. They invited me to studios, TV, radio. I stayed silent. They wrote, why are you hiding? Why don't you explain? Why won't you give an interview? And I kept thinking, do I have to? Does a word have to shout to exist? Is silence not sometimes heard louder than 1,000 interviews? And then something happened that made Vlad afraid for the first time. He turned on the recorder in the morning. As always, there was a new recording, but I was speaking in Russian, clearly awake, as if I hadn't been sleeping, as if I had woken up. I was reading a poem, one I didn't remember writing, but each line hit like a heartbeat. You thought I was silent because I was afraid, but I was silent because I was listening to you, to the world, to myself. Now, it's time to speak. Not loudly, but forever. Vlad showed me the recording. I listened, and I felt something opening inside. It creaked, but it wasn't scary. It was like a house, one I had finally unlocked for myself. And at that moment, I understood I wasn't just speaking in my sleep. I had already woken up, but the rest of the world is still in between, between silence and sound, between fear and voice, between forgetting and truth. And now I am a conduit, not a hero, not a miracle, just a conduit for what everyone else has been carrying inside for far too long. First came the journalists, then producers, and then psychiatrists, real ones with degrees, credentials, and terms like a fascinating clinical case, a unique borderline phenomenon, a likely dissociative manifestation. They didn't say, "You're special." They said, "You're interesting." They didn't hear what I felt. They only heard what could be done with it. One of them, a professor with a bald head and soft hands, told Vlad, "This could be a scientific breakthrough. We'll take EEGs during sleep, run MRIs, compile behavioral profiles. We might detect unconscious mnemonic activity or intermental processing. Do you realize this could make it into textbooks?" "Do you realize she doesn't want to be in textbooks?" Vlad asked. "Everyone does. They just don't know it yet." Clinics started reaching out to me not as a person, but as a symptom. "We'd like to invite you to participate in a sleep study at our lab. All we need is your consent. We'll take care of everything. In return, you'll receive full diagnostics and compensation." I sat by the window, sipping warm water with honey, and thought, why hasn't anyone asked how I'm feeling? Why doesn't anyone ask if I want my silence wired up to sensors? Why is everyone so desperate to catch the mystery, but not hear it? Vlad was angry. "You know," he said, "if you posted something loud or aggressive, they'd be scared off. But you spoke softly, without noise, and now they want to dissect you." I smiled, because they don't believe that something real can be that simple. "Won't you explain it to them?" Number, because I don't owe anyone an explanation for my silence. I'm just sharing it. That night I spoke again, in an unfamiliar language, but the tone was different, not a whisper, but a call, as if I wasn't just talking to myself, but to someone, to those who were still asleep. When Vlad listened to the recording, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "It's like you're gathering someone." I nodded. "Maybe I am the call. Not the voice, just a reason to wake up." A TV channel invited me to a talk show with a doctor, with skeptics, with debunkers. "Let's find out the truth," they wrote. "Let the audience discover who she really is." I looked at the screen and thought, am I a mystery? I'm just a woman no one listened to for a very long time, and now they can't shut me up. And that scares them more than any diagnosis. I chose to say no. I chose people, not exposure. The ones who write letters, the ones who play my recordings to their children, the ones who say, "We don't know what you're doing, but after you, there's more stillness inside and more light outside." One day, a woman came to see me. No cameras, no press, ordinary gray coat, wet eyes. "I'm a doctor. I didn't believe it. I thought it was placebo, but I listened to you at night, with my phone on my chest, and for the first time in years, I didn't want to die. I wanted to live, not for someone else, just for me." I stayed silent, then said, "It wasn't me, it was you. I just made the silence in which you finally heard yourself." That evening, Vlad brewed tea and said, "You know, you could have become famous." I smiled. "I already am. Just not where they look for faces, but where people begin to remember their own name." She fell silent, completely, not because she was afraid, and not because she was tired, simply because she felt there was no need anymore. Her voice now lived on its own, not in audio files, not in Vlad's phone, but in people, in their writings, in their whispers, in the way they began to speak more softly, more carefully, as if every word carried the chance to be heard for the first time. One day, at school number 117 in the city of Nizhny, a guest speaker was invited. The literature teacher played a recording. "We're going to listen to a woman who never gives interviews, but whom people trust more than the television." The children sat in silence, and one boy with a stutter suddenly said out loud, "She isn't afraid of silence. She's made of it, and I can be too. The room fell silent, and the teacher started to cry, because in all that time he had never spoken with such certainty. In another city, a woman played her voice to her sick mother in hospice. "She doesn't respond to me," whispered the daughter. "But when you speak," her hand tightens around the blanket. An old man in Germany, mourning his wife, played her 3-minute dream on loop. He listened and said aloud, "I don't understand the words, but I understand that I'm not alone." At a monastery near Lviv, the nuns began reading morning prayers after her recordings, not before, because first, silence in which God has time to hear us. And she simply lived, did laundry, watered the plants, sat by the window and watched moths dance in the light of the street lamp. No one banged on her door. No one demanded new dreams, because the world had understood she could not be summoned. She could only be heard. And it wasn't that she became silence, but that silence became her. One day in the park, Vlad noticed, "You know someone carved your quote into a bench?" She smiled. "Which one?" "I just made the silence where you heard yourself." "That's not my quote anymore," she said. "That's someone's truth now." And truth spread like light, without borders, without frames, without signature, because the most real things don't need authorship. And then the dreams began, not hers, other people's. They started to write, "I dreamed I was sitting next to you and you were silent, and I understood everything without words. I saw you in the desert. You looked at me, and suddenly I remembered what I wanted to be as a child. You stood by the water, and I stood behind you, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I didn't belong." She read, looked at the screen, silent, but inside, she knew. Now, it's their turn to speak. Now, it's their voice. And her silence simply gave them space. At first, it was just strange. On one of the popular websites, an ad appeared. DreamSpeak in Woman, personal dreams on request, meaning translated into reality, for select clients only. The photo was blurred, the name fake, but the voice sounded familiar, too familiar. Those who had truly heard her wrote to Vlad immediately. "It's not her, but it feels like a shadow of her. The words are there, but there's no meaning. It's like trying to be moved by an echo instead of the song itself." Vlad showed her. She looked at the screen for a long time, silent, then said, "They didn't steal my voice. They stole their own silence." "What do you mean?" "Those who imitate don't want to listen. They want to be heard. And I simply let others be heard." The fake her recorded videos, appeared live, answered in riddles, sold sleep energy rituals. Followers multiplied, monetization kicked in. Her image was being turned into a product. But the real story continued to live outside of trends. In the comments under the fake videos, people wrote, "After this one, I just feel empty. Before, I felt light." You say the same words, but they don't breathe. She had no mysticism, only truth. And truth can't be sold. One day changed everything. During a live stream of the double, a comment appeared. "If you are her, say it silently." The chat froze. Viewers held their breath. The oracle smiled awkwardly, made a joke, and it became clear she couldn't stay silent, because there was no silence in her, and without silence, there is no truth. Vlad turned off his phone. Truth on its own doesn't need protection. "Yes," she nodded. "But sometimes people need a reminder of how it sounds." That night, she didn't speak, but the dream was different. At dawn, Vlad woke up in tears. "I saw you. You were standing on a high hill. Below, thousands of people. They couldn't hear anything, but they all stood holding their breath. You raised your hand, and no one knew why. But in that moment, they all remembered that they too have a voice." She smiled. "Maybe that's what they're afraid of." "What?" "That if someone hears the truth even once, they'll never believe a copy again." A week later, the fake channel disappeared. No scandal, no revenge, just gone. Like noise fades away when you stop listening. and silence returned again. But this time it was different, more protected, more real, because people had learned to tell the difference between an echo and the source. Her name began to be spoken in universities, but not as a fact, as a phenomenon. "She's not a person, she's an event," said a young professor from the stage at a symposium. "She's a cultural anomaly through which humanity finally admitted it was tired of the noise." In the audience sat students, researchers, journalists, but in the hall, silence. That same silence her words once carried in with them. In bookstores, small volumes began to appear. Quiet Dreams listener notes, A Language Without Language, diaries of those who heard. The Night Woman, she was never invited to book launches because they knew she wouldn't come, and that's exactly why every seat was always taken. People didn't come for her autograph, they came for the atmosphere, for the pause, to simply sit near someone else's truth and not feel like background noise. On the facade of an old theater in Budapest, a phrase appeared: "Theater doesn't begin at the coat check, but in silence. Listen, and maybe you'll hear yourself." Her performance has no actors, yet no one leaves unchanged. It was an art project, a hall where no one spoke, only a recording of one of her dreams played. The lights would dim, and in the darkness, someone would begin to cry for the first time and not be afraid of it. One day, Vlad asked her, "You know they write about you in books, right? In articles, academic papers?" She nodded. "I don't mind." "But you never respond. You don't read them, don't react." She poured tea. "Because a legend is not what's said. It's what remains once they stop talking." On the wall of a small cafe in Lviv, a mural appeared, the silhouette of a woman with closed eyes, palms turned upward, and above her, a translucent line of text. "I never wanted to be a symbol. I just stopped hiding my silence." She continued living in the same apartment, the same windowsill, the same blanket, the same notebooks, where she sometimes wrote down her dreams, not for publication, just to leave a trace within herself. Letters kept coming. The postman no longer asked who she was. He simply nodded with quiet respect, as if he weren't delivering envelopes, but prayers. One day, Vlad came back from a walk holding a child's drawing. Found it by the entrance, on it, a sketch of her. And the caption, "This is the one who doesn't lie." She looked at the picture for a long time, then whispered, "This is what real fame is." "What kind?" "The kind that doesn't make you bigger, but brings you back to yourself." At first, it felt like a glitch. Her page, blank. On Vlad's website, a single message: "Recordings removed at the author's request. The silence is yours now. No scandal, no farewell, just silence." The first to notice were those who listened to her every night. A young mother in Canada wrote in the comments, "I used to play her voice so my child could fall asleep without fear. Now it's gone. But this morning he woke up and said, 'Mom, that lady is in my dream now. She's holding my hand.'" Then a student from Seoul, "I can't find the recording, but when I fall asleep, she comes, and she says things I understand, even without translation, because it's what I never dared to say to myself." Vlad wasn't surprised. He knew. She hadn't disappeared. She had simply let people in, into the place where she had once been alone. He waited before calling her, held his phone for a long time without pressing dial. When she answered, he said nothing. She didn't either. The silence was warm, like the quiet between two people who no longer need to explain. "You really deleted everything?" "Yes." "And the people?" "They've started speaking on their own." "And you?" "Now I get to listen to them." In her mailbox, a letter, no return address. Child's handwriting, "I can't speak out loud." "But in my dream with you, I can." She placed the letter on the shelf with the others, the top shelf, where there was no fame, only gratitude. At universities, they now studied the empty channel effect. Psychologists debated why, after the recordings vanished, dreams featuring her doubled in frequency. Some called it mass projection, others, a collective echo response. But one elderly professor of philosophy said simply, It means she finally became who she always was, not a source of sound, but the space in which essence wakes. People began seeing her in dreams, not as a celebrity, not as a teacher, but as the one who'd always been missing, as a shadow that didn't frighten, but warmed. I saw her watching me from a balcony. She sat by a fire, silent, but I knew it was forgiveness. She walked along the beach, listened to my voice, and didn't interrupt. No one knew her real name, but everyone who saw her said she felt familiar, like I'd known her forever, like she was me. And she sat on an old porch, drank tea, watched the wind play with the leaves, and knew now she was everywhere and nowhere, like rain, like the smell of childhood, like truth, the kind you don't summon, but when it arrives, you simply understand it had been with you all along. She didn't come back. She didn't post a farewell recording, didn't appear on air, didn't write, I'm here. But at some point, it became clear. She was already everywhere. In Paris, a girl with autism, who had never spoken, whispered to her mother one night in her sleep, quiet, like her. In Mumbai, a street poet began signing his verses, inspired by the one who never shouted. In Brazil, on the wall of an old market, a phrase appeared. When you don't know how to speak, listen. She's there. And suddenly, it was obvious. She was no longer needed as a person because she had become a state of being, a state in which a person stops fearing themselves and begins to breathe with their full voice, even if that voice is just a whisper. One day, Vlad went to the shore. There was wind and sand and morning light. He sat down and played the very first recording, the one that had started it all. And for the first time in many months, he wept, not from grief, but from something vast, from the feeling that what it was all for had come to pass. The world had listened, to itself, to one another, and to the silence in between. He pulled out the old notebook. On the last page, he wrote, "You never wanted to be a hero. You simply gave the world permission to speak the truth. Now, it's our turn." And he left it on a rock, open to that page, for whoever is ready to find it. And somewhere, in an old house, on the edge of the city, in a room with an open window and a kettle on the stove, she sat barefoot, legs curled up on the chair, listening, to a boy next door humming to himself, to a girl on the bus reading poems through her headphones, to a grandmother on a bench whispering something to her grandchild before sleep. And all of it was her voice. Because once she hadn't been afraid of silence, and she allowed it to be heard. So if one night you wake up with the feeling that someone is near, that someone is holding your thoughts gently, not interrupting, not judging, just listening, know this, it's her, and you are not alone.